Edouard Manet's The Bar at the Folies-Bergère. This is a popular bar in Paris. Now, you were asked not to do extensive research on this. You were asked to just start off with what you see. So let's just begin there. All of you have described the bartender lady. All of you have picked up on the fact that she doesn't look too happy. Most of you have noted this disconnected reflection in the mirror. So what's going on here? This is not natural. The figures don't add up. This person's not probably standing. The angles would be wrong. So this is contrived. This is something that artists put in there. So is this something that she's thinking about? Is it something she's anticipating or dreaming about? We're not really sure. But aside from that, take a look. The mirror is really the key to understanding this work of art. So when we go back to our elements of art here, I'd like you to take a look at space. Okay, what's going on with this space element? Now, at first glance, you might think that this is a very deep, cavernous space. You have these giant chandeliers. You have row after row of people, or these little black vertical marks that indicate top hats of people, and these blobs of pink paint that indicate faces. Yet our mind always wants to make sense of things, so we're seeing these pink blobs and these vertical strokes, and we're interpreting them as people. We see this space that's going back here in the distance, and we have this gray in the background, and we're interpreting that as the back wall. And look at these funny little green feet dangling here. That's a little strange. Why would there be feet dangling right there? Okay, so what's going on is the mirror here behind the bar is reflecting what's out in front of our bartender. Okay, so why all this activity on the bar? In fact, I'm sorry, on the mirror. In fact, most of the activity takes place on the surface of the mirror. And that's extremely important to this generation of painters. This was the first generation of painters that began to question the notion that art needed to be artifice. Art needed to replicate as closely as possible objects that are occupying space in the three-dimensional world. So the fact that all of this activity is taking place on a perfectly flat surface mirrors what is to come, which is truly the dawn of modern painting, where painting began to be more about the elements of art and principles of design, that is the colors, the shapes, the actual marks on the surface, and not so much the characteristic of an illusion. Okay, so let's look at some of our other elements here. So essentially, what looks like deep space is actually very shallow space. What we're looking at is a distance of, maybe 3 or 4 feet at the most between the front of the bar here, where the viewer is located, and then where the mirror surface begins. Okay, now let's take a look at its shape. Now, I think this is a lot of fun. Take a look at the shape of the lady's body here. She sort of has sort of a larger curve here at the bottom, sort of smaller at the top. Take a look how it's very similar to the shape of this champagne bottle. And it's even kind of cut in two the way this gold foil sort of cuts the champagne bottle in two. So her body is very much mirroring the shape of this champagne bottle, which is appropriate and fitting for our woman here who is tending bar. Okay, what other shapes do we see? We've already mentioned how these vertical strokes indicate people, how these little round blobs of pink indicate faces. Let's see, we see lots of round shapes, in fact. We see this round shape in her medallion here. We see some flowers here, some round shapes in this rose here. Now look at this. This is a prominent round shape here. And this is, of course, an orange. Now, let's think about this for a moment. Take a look at her dress here. I think I have already let the cat out of the bag and told you this was taking place in Paris at a particular bar. You can tell by her dress that this is sometime in yesteryear. This is not a modern outfit, and men don't wear top hats anymore ordinarily, so we can tell this took place quite a while ago. Okay, so what's going on with these oranges? Why are there oranges sitting on the bar? I don't think many of us go into a bar nowadays and see oranges sitting on the bar. Also note the color here. This is the only really saturated color. This is this very, very bright orange. Let's go back to our color element. Okay, this is very pure and saturated. The word saturated means pure. Everything else is kind of dulled down. Even this blue is sort of a dull blue. This red here is definitely a toned down red. There's no pure alizarin crimson or any kind of bright reds here. Everything is very, very toned down, but yet these oranges show up. Well, in France, in the around the end of the 1800s, oranges were not something that were commonplace. Nowadays, we have oranges in our own kitchen, but back then an orange was extremely special. An orange was extremely expensive. Oranges never grew in France, so how did one get an orange in France? Oranges had to be grown in a hothouse called an orangery, and the extremely wealthy people might have their own orangery on their estate, but for the ordinary person to have an orange, that would be very unique and very special. Okay, so we've also, one final note about shape. I find this kind of interesting. Take a look at this label here. For all you graphic designers here who might be concerned with logo design in the future, I wonder if you recognize this logo, this red triangle. Okay, in case you don't, I'll just tell you what it is. This red triangle is the logo for Bass Ale, a particular type of beer. This logo and this label has not changed, as you can see, in over 100 years. So designers out there, good luck designing a logo that can last that long. It's really extraordinary. Okay, so we've gone over some of our elements and principles, and we've also, let's take a look at texture real quick. Okay, I've noted a couple times here about how the people are indicated with just blobs and strokes. There's no real indication here of, the artist has not labored over any of these spaces, just some very quick strokes, and they're giving the effect of this texture that's sort of decorating the surface of the canvas. And take a look at these chandeliers. Again, these are just some quick vertical strokes of white mixed with some pinks, some cobalt blues in there. We have this texture here on the bar, this marble, this faux finish marble stuff. Again, this is a painted texture. Of course, it's not a real texture. Okay, but overall, take a look at all of these edges. We don't have a whole lot of hard edges here. There's not much that's really in focus. The figures back here out of focus. Her face is in focus, the oranges are in focus, but these bottles are, for the most part, have kind of soft edges. If you were to look at this closely in a museum, you'd see the brush wobbling everywhere. This is not a mechanical straight line at all. In fact, if I were looking at this in Photoshop, I'd be able to demonstrate for you just how off that line really is. Okay, so again, we've mentioned how artists were all of a sudden interested in decorating the surface of the canvas, not so much in creating the illusion, but in making the canvas itself beautiful, and that was a revolutionary idea. So just by looking at the the soft edges, the textures, the unblended brush strokes, that's another big one here. The artist didn't labor over some of these highlights. This is just a quick stroke of paint, and Manet was, that was very typical of Manet. In fact, he was derided for that at that time. This was considered sort of Manet paintings were almost laughable in their lack of polish, lack of perfection. But Manet was starting a revolution in painting here. Okay, so just by looking at this, how it's not very hard edge, it's not very precise. We know we're past the neoclassical period, and just by the outfits here, we can tell we're somewhere in the 19th century. Okay, so where are we at? A good guess would be the Impressionists. Manet was sort of the father of the Impressionists. The Impressionists that followed him sort of took his lead and carried it much further. Manet was still sort of lingering from the previous period of realism, but he had definitely opened that door to the next big thing in painting, which was, of course, Impressionism. Okay, I haven't mentioned what these green feet are doing up there. Okay, this is the entertainment. This is actually people up in a trapeze, up in the rafters, entertaining everyone. So the people are back here, they're looking out towards same direction the bartender is looking, and they're watching the entertainment. So everyone, please proceed to your milestone 4 submission. Choose one of the paintings that looks interesting to you. And again, for milestone 4 submission, we're not expecting heavy-duty research. You're going to have 2 more opportunities to revise and refine your information on this same painting. So just start out with the elements of art and principles of design. Go through your list here. See which ones look the most prominent to you, which ones jump out at you the most, and describe those. Now, if going through the elements and principles help you to make a comment about style or perhaps the period that it's from, then by all means put that in. But we would really like you to focus on the elements and principles at this point.